What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rovardo. Today, I want to talk about three youngsters to keep an eye on at New York Giants training camp. Now, training camp, it's finally here. It starts this week. I'm super excited. Of course, the Giants haven't been on the practice field in over a month since their mini camp in June, at the beginning of June, really, end of May. It's been a long time. We haven't seen New York Giants football in a while, but this week, the NFL starts to return. We get training camp. We get Giants players on the field next week or maybe the week after. I don't know what the timeline is. They'll put on the pads, and we are one step closer towards real NFL football. I cannot wait for that. But this should be an interesting training camp for the Giants this summer because, well, let's face it, a lot of injuries this past season, a lot of newcomers, a lot of departures in the offseason as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this roster takes shape. And as we all know, usually the roster starts to take shape during training camp. You have position battles to keep an eye on. You have young players looking for larger roles, which is what we're going to talk about in this episode. And you have players returning from injury, Daniel Jones being one of them, the big one returning from injury for the Giants this summer. So I kind of want to just preview training camp generally, but really focus in on a few of these youngsters that I think we should keep an eye on. We talk about the big names a lot. We've had a lot of discussions on this channel about Malik Neighbors, Tyler Nubin, and some of these other young guys that we know are going to be in the lineup early and often. What about some of these other guys who maybe are fighting for playing time, that are young and have potential? That's what I want to dive into in this episode. But before I do so, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, the first player that I want to dive into is someone that we've discussed quite a bit on this channel already, but I kind of want to just dedicate some extra time to Tyrone Tracy Jr., rookie running back that the Giants drafted in the 5th round out of Purdue, former wide receiver converted to running back, a very dynamic talent who forced 46 missed tackles last season as a running back for Purdue, despite taking only 113 carries. So 46 missed tackles. He had 132 total touches on the season. That's pretty much a missed tackle once every 3 plays. The guy stays upright and breaks through arm tackles. He's really, really dynamic in the receiving game. I think that Tyrone Tracy could carve himself out a pretty sizable role with some good practices during the summer. Now, we all know Saquon Barkley departed. Okay, who's the lead back now? Devin Singletary. There's a good chance Devin Singletary gets enough carries and enough yardage to go for 1,000 rushing yards this year. But the Giants seem to be ready to take this running back by committee approach. A lot of Giants fans love that idea. A lot of Giants fans are kind of pushing back at it because they want to see Saquon Barkley back in the Giants uniform. Unfortunately, he's gone to our hated rival, the Eagles. So with Tyrone Tracy being that RB2, maybe 3, got to keep in mind Eric Gray is there too, another youngster to keep an eye on. And really, this is forming into a positional battle. Who will be the number 2 running back behind Devin Singletary? Again, we know Devin Singletary is going to be the starter. The Giants signed him in the offseason. They paid him a sizable amount of money. But behind him, if they are building this committee, who's the running back on 3rd and long to be the receiver, maybe catch some passes out of the backfield? Well, Tyrone Tracy is probably that guy. He's a former wide receiver. He's a tackle breaker, and he just has a knack for making big, explosive plays with the ball in his hands. So I think you could see Tyrone Tracy really carve out a role if he plays well during the summer practices. But then again, we also have to keep an eye on Eric Gray. Maybe Eric Gray outperforms him in that facet of the game. He looks really good in the preseason over Tracy, and boom, now Eric Gray could be the guy that we're talking about going into the regular season with the larger role. But I really am banking on Tyrone Tracy here. I think that he's very young. He's very talented. I mean, he's a little old for a rookie. He was in college for 6 years, and he is, I think, 23 or 24 years old. So he's a bit older for a rookie, but he's still a very talented player. He's still a young player who's still growing into the running back position. And because he didn't play a lot of running back during his collegiate career, you'd have to think that he doesn't have enough mileage on him to cause any breakdowns early on in his career. This should be a young player who continues to grow and ascend into a larger role. And again, if he looks good throughout the summer, shows that explosiveness, I could see him playing quite a bit during the regular season. So as we head into training camp this week, I am keeping a very close eye on Tyrone Tracy and really the Giants' running back position at large. But now moving ahead to the second player that I want to discuss, another skill position player, let's talk about wide receiver Bryce Ford-Wheaton. Now, a lot of buzz surrounded that guy last year when the Giants signed him as an undrafted free agent out of West Virginia. He scored a perfect 10.0 relative athletic score. I think he and Calvin Johnson, Megatron, are the only 2 receivers that have scored a 10.0 relative athletic score since it started being a thing that was recorded. So obviously a very impressive feat right there. He's a freak athlete. He's like 6'5". He runs a 4.3 something 40-yard dash. I think it's a 4.38. Super talented player. So why did he not get drafted? Well, he did have some problems with drops. And I think that the scouting report mentioned he looked a little bit like he was lacking fluidity during his route running, and he wasn't much of a separator. And again, the drops. So again, you've got a player here who's just a moldable ball of clay, all of the athleticism and physical talent in the world. But what can he do with it? Last year, we know he was starting to generate some buzz at training camp, making some plays, and unfortunately, his rookie season was cut short before it even began due to a torn ACL. So now here we are 1 year later. Everybody's talking about Daniel Jones returning from that ACL injury, obviously. But maybe we need to start talking about Bryce Ford-Wheaton as well just a little bit, because he could be a player who, if he stays healthy this summer, puts in the work during those practices, gets some decent playing time in preseason. I could see Bryce Ford-Wheaton with that 6'5" frame, catching a couple touchdown passes and making a push to be on the final 53-man roster. The problem is, who are you cutting in place of him? Because you've got your first four receivers: Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Jalen Hyatt. Those are your four guys. You're probably only carrying six receivers going into the season. So WR5 is very likely Isaiah Hodgins. WR6, well, that's where the competition really begins, because that's where you have Bryce Ford-Wheaton. That's where you have Allen Robinson. That's where you have Isaiah McKenzie, and technically Gunnar Olszewski as well as a wide receiver. He's really the Giants' return specialist, but he's listed as a receiver on the depth chart. So does he automatically get that sixth spot because he's the return specialist? What happens here? Well, I think that if Bryce Ford-Wheaton wants to make the final 53-man roster, be a contributor on this team during the regular season, he has to outplay all of those guys, because you've got Allen Robinson as a former Pro Bowler and 1,000-yard receiver, bringing a lot of veteran experience to the team. That's valuable. Gunnar Olszewski and Isaiah McKenzie, they bring special teams experience. Very valuable. If Bryce Ford-Wheaton can't show that he can do things on special teams, he might have a tough time making the roster unless he really balls out during this training camp period. So he's one of the guys that I'm keeping a very close eye on as he enters his second season, pretty much his rookie season. I know we often make this comparison. Whenever the Giants sign a talented undrafted free agent wide receiver, Victor Cruz missed his entire rookie season, came back in year two, looked really good. I know we're all hoping and praying that Bryce Ford-Wheaton has a similar career trajectory, but let's just take it one day at a time, one training camp practice at a time, and see how he does throughout this summer. I think it'll be very interesting to see how he performs and if he's able to carve out a role for himself on the final 53-man roster. Now, a third guy that I want to talk about, this one might surprise you guys, but I do think it's worth keeping an eye on Josh Ezeudu. And the reason why is because 2 seasons into his career now, year one, played a lot of snaps at left guard. Year two, didn't play a single snap at left guard, played all of his snaps at left tackles, made a few starts as well. Never really looked like a good player on the football field. A lot of struggles from Josh Ezeudu. Now, what are we getting from him in year three? If you guys recall, I think we discussed this on the channel, during mandatory minicamp and OTAs, the Giants were training him at right tackle. This guy's never played right tackle before. Throughout his collegiate career at UNC, he was a left guard / left tackle, and I think he maybe played a little bit of right guard, but he's never played right tackle before. So it's surprising to see the Giants trying him out there, but for me, it means two things. One, they don't trust Evan Neal. Neither do we, so that's okay. They don't trust Evan Neal. And two, they might be feeling like Josh Ezeudu hasn't found a home yet on this offensive line, which means he could be entering a make or break year where if he doesn't start to show signs of progress in this third season, by the end of it, he could be getting phased out for a different talent next offseason. So this is kind of back against the wall for Josh Ezeudu. You've gotten a decent amount of playing time through your first 2 seasons of your career. Haven't really looked like a potential starter just yet. Year three, you kind of have to start looking like one. Otherwise, the Giants might be looking for a new patchwork offensive lineman who plays guard and tackle. So I think that'll be an interesting player to keep a close eye on throughout training camp. If Josh Ezeudu is making strides, if he starts playing a lot at right tackle throughout the summer, maybe he starts outperforming Evan Neal there, well then boom, maybe he's the solution. Jermaine Olumoner plays guard, Josh Ezeudu out at right tackle, or maybe vice versa. So it could be interesting how this shakes out. Again, that's also, you have to keep an eye on Evan Neal throughout the summer, which I'm sure all of us are going to do anyway, because we're eager to see if he'll finally take that step forward and live up to any bit of the expectations we had for him as a former first-round pick. But yeah, those 3 players in particular, I think I'm going to be keeping a close eye on. There's a lot of others. Again, we've talked about the big names. We've talked about Tyler Nubin, Malik Neighbors, all these guys. exhaustingly so. We just keep mentioning those big stars, but taking a little closer look at the back end of this roster, again, there are quite a few interesting young talents. The Giants have a very young football team. They are still rebuilding. So who of these young guys are going to step up and start to make more of an impact? Now, I'm going to go through here and take a look and see if there's anybody else worth keeping an eye on out of these young players. I will say I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on Tommy DeVito throughout the summer. I don't think the QB2 is locked in as Drew Lock. Potentially, we could see Tommy DeVito ball out throughout the summer. Maybe he does make the final 53-man roster. I think that he absolutely should. Maybe he moves up the depth chart too. We shall see about that one. But any other young players, John Michael Schmitz, definitely keep an eye on him as he enters his second year. A little bit of a struggle as a rookie. Let's see if he can take a step forward this summer. And on the defensive side of the ball, since the three players that I picked were all offensive, I do think Trey Hawkins is worth keeping an eye on. Now, we know that CB2, pretty big hole for the Giants, but Cordell Fly is expected to take over as the starter. But that's not set in stone either. Somebody could absolutely compete with Cordell Fly, maybe take that job from him, or at least rotate in that spot with him. So keep an eye on Trey Hawkins. We know he crushed it during summer last year, won the week 1 starting job, and he deserved it. He played really well throughout the summer, but once he got to the regular season, didn't exactly pan out. Maybe he does that whole process over again and goes into the regular season and crushes it. Totally possible. I don't know if we're banking on it, but it is something that could potentially happen. So keep a close eye on Trey Hawkins. Maybe he's just a standout summer performer every year, but if he's able to put in another summer of good practices, get another crack at the starting job, maybe he gets it right this time in the new defensive scheme under Shane Bowen. Maybe he becomes a long-term starter at cornerback. We can hope. So that's another player to keep an eye on. Nick McLeod as well in that same group competing for that CB2 job. And of the safeties that are on this roster, actually, I do think there's an interesting one to keep in mind, and that is Jervarius Owens. He was a captain at Houston before the Giants drafted him last offseason in, I believe, the 7th round. He had a lot of interceptions and big-time plays for Houston. Just an interesting player who didn't really get any playing time as a rookie. Maybe this summer he plays well. Maybe in this kind of thinned out defensive backfield that the Giants have, he could see some playing time. Same thing goes for Dane Belton. Dane Belton is a guy that we had a lot of confidence in when the Giants drafted him as a rookie out of Iowa in 2022. He had a lot of interceptions, was a real ball hawk playmaker during his time at Iowa. Again, has seen the field in spurts and made plays in spurts, but hasn't gotten an expanded role. Don't think he necessarily will this year because the Giants drafted Tyler Nubin, but potentially if injuries arise at the position or if they're switching up the personnel packages in this new defensive scheme that Bowen is implementing, maybe we see some Dane Belton. Again, another player that I'm keeping an eye on throughout the summer. Now, last one that I will say, it's a pair of players, Casey Rogers and Elijah Chapman. Both are rookies, undrafted rookies, interior defensive linemen who both have gotten buzz to potentially compete for a spot on this roster. On the interior of the offensive line, or defensive line rather, the Giants have Dexter Lawrence. Next to him, unestablished who that starter is. Probably Nacho, Rakeem Nunez-Roches, but maybe one of these youngsters can push for playing time and get that starting job. Jordan Riley, another one to keep an eye on. So those are kind of the positions and players that I am keeping a close eye on going into training camp. I think that they're really intriguing talents. Again, this is a very young football team. This is a rebuilding football team. So this is going to be a year for young players to hit the football field and hopefully make an impact to grow their skills and become larger parts of the team going forward. So those are the guys that I'm keeping a close eye on. Again, training camp is going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to cover it in every extent of the word. Cover it. We're going to be covering it right here on Fireside Giants. So let me know who I might have missed going through some of these youngsters to keep an eye on. Again, not talking about those big name players, but some of those flying under the radar guys. Let me know if I missed any down below in the comment section. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review and go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. But without further ado, I'll catch you all on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.